welcome to another Team Braconi podcast. Today's a special day. We have Anthony Bianco on the podcast today. He's an excellent real estate attorney we use. He services all of northern New Jersey. He has an office in North Bergen, which is Hudson County, and very excited to announce he's opening an office in Westwood, New Jersey, which is Bergen County. We use him for a lot of our files, find him to be top-notch for multiple reasons, which we'll get into. You've been doing it over a decade, I think 13 years. I think you worked for a bigger law firm initially and
That's right.
Came over. And so tell us a little bit about your law firm and kind of what you do, what you specialize in. I think you do commercial litigation as well. We appreciate you tremendously. That's why we're having you on and wanted you to kind of touch on a few topics today.
Sure. Well, listen, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me here. I think the podcast is great, what you're doing in terms of educating people, inspiring people. It's great. So it's great to be here. I started practicing law now in my 13th year. Ironically enough, I know we're here to talk about real estate. I did not start practicing real estate law until I went out on my own about 8 years ago. And I had a mentor at the time. He said, listen, you really need to get involved in real estate. I said, what is that? I've never done that. I don't want to do it. It doesn't sound like it would interest me at all. And I got into it, took courses, studied what to do, again, had the assistance of a mentor along the way. And I absolutely loved it. Just hit the ground running with it. And I haven't turned back since.
I didn't know that. And It's funny you say that because, it's one thing to understand the legalities with real estate, which certainly you have that. There's no question. It's another thing to have the personality to deal with clients, especially on the residential side,
sure,
that have emotions going on throughout the process,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And you have such a good ability, and our team is super appreciative to adapt to those needs and concerns and address them immediately, and honestly address them yourself. I mean, I call your cell phone.
Right.
You're really available, not only to myself, but my staff, my team, our clients. But that's something that they don't teach you in law school, right?
It's true.
The ability to deal with these emotions. And also, I find that the best attorneys, and you certainly do this better than anyone, you adapt your style to what the client needs.
It's true. And one of the things, and I know that your team does this, all along the way, your team is constantly engaged, which is very important from an attorney's perspective to have the realtor there. They're usually the first person that I speak to. So I have an understanding of the transaction, the dynamics, the things that I need to know to move forward. But one of the things, and this may seem obvious, whenever I'm connected with a new client, I want to know what their goals are, right? That may sound obvious to people. Oh, well, if you're a purchaser, you want to buy. But no, I want to get to know them, right? Are you purchasing for the first time? So you may be leasing and, because of that, you're looking for your forever home and you don't want to be in a lease anymore. And so this is a very important part of your life. Or maybe you're selling because you want to, you're retired, you don't want to carry a property anymore, you want to downsize. But those, things to me, those personal things are important to know going forward. Not only does it create a relationship and a rapport with the client, but to really have an understanding of what's motivating them.
Right. Yeah. I think we kind of take that for granted when we're handing things off because we've had like a 6-month relationship or a 12-month relationship with the client. Like, here you go. Here's, John Doe. And, so I think that an important point is to kind of, for us agents to immediately connect with the attorney and the attorney to have that ear open to want to know about the client so that the transaction starts off on the right footing.
Well, and I think you have an appreciation for all the work that's been done up to that point. One of the things that you're excellent with all the clients, but particularly you've been so good with our first-time home buyers. And we had mentioned you have such a good grasp, especially from the attorney side, on the process of purchasing a home, especially as a first-time buyer. And as an agent, and I'm certain as an attorney, you're going to treat a client a little differently that maybe is a savvy investor that's purchased.
Absolutely.
Or myself or Alfredo, who's in the industry, than you are with someone who hasn't even seen this process before, never gone through it. How would you describe, the Cliff Note version to someone going through the home purchase process for the first time?
Sure. One of the things that I do, and, it's just me, not everyone does this, but I will spend sometimes close to an hour with that first time home buyer, going through the process with them. I use it as an opportunity to educate so that going forward, they have a full understanding of what to expect. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to have questions along the way, but I will explain each phase of things, right? From attorney review to what you will need to do as soon as attorney review is concluded, right? Because there's multiple dates of performance that they'll become aware of, but we talk about it during attorney review. I'll spend time reviewing the contract, the changes to the contract, because that's going to set the stage for what happens after. And again, great questions come up throughout the process, issues related to mortgage, appraisal, inspection. Those are all things that we lay out within the first few days of being engaged. So then again, there's a clear path and understanding for the client going forward. But I do think, to your point, it's important to do that for a first-time home buyer. I remember when I was there, and at the time I was an attorney, but not necessarily versed or practicing in real estate. And I didn't have a full understanding. But now, going through it and actually counseling clients along the way, you have an understanding that people really, they want to have that clear sense of what's going on. And you're there to answer their questions, manage expectations, protect them along the way, making sure that things are getting done timely, of course, as well. And again, it's a group effort from the realtors to the other professionals involved, title company, et cetera. So I don't think that necessarily answered your question, but I try, initially to go through everything from start to finish.
I think that's the key. I think that's you did a lot there. So you mentioned a lot of how you walk them through eventually, but I think the fact that you give kind of that outline initially gives our clients confidence, not only in you, but in the process, and a better understanding of what to expect. So as those things begin to occur, and then you explain them as chronologically they're occurring, they're already expecting that, or they at least have some recollection of speaking about that.
Right.
As far as lenders go, I know that's a very important process. It's something that we have 4 preferred lenders we recommend on our team based on their track record with us, based on their ability to close and not overpromise, their timelines that they hit, and just their volume. They have got the team and staff to better serve our clients. As an attorney, when you overlook a file and you see a particular lender or a different lender or lack thereof, what do you find to be important when kind of discussing that with the client?
Sure. Well, first I'll ask, are you working with a big bank or not? Because in my experience, when, you have the Wells Fargos of the world involved in a transaction, sometimes that could be problematic. You're not necessarily getting the customer service that you should receive. So that's first and foremost. Second, I will talk to clients and say to them the obvious, right? You do not want to, have any big purchases throughout this process, even though, your lender, loan officer, whoever you're dealing with, they're going to walk you through these things. But I'll reiterate a lot of that as well. I think that's important to have an understanding that also you have to get your mortgage application in. As soon as we conclude attorney review, I'm on the client. Hey, is it in? Can you connect me with your lender? So now I can develop that relationship with them. They know who I am, because as attorneys, we communicate with the lenders as well. We want to check in. We want to know what's going on. And also stating the obvious again, make sure there are certain things outside your control. Of course, you lose your job. That's a terrible thing, but don't go leaving your job voluntarily. Again, stating the obvious, but things that I've seen happen that, when I've thankfully been on the sales side, which can be a problem. So it's just obvious things like that, just to set the client straight as they proceed through that process.
Again, outlining information.
I think they are obvious to us sometimes, and I think that's why it's important you to reiterate them, because they may not actually be obvious to them. So that's a very good point.
Taking a step back and looking at the attorney review process, which is, I don't want to say totally unique to New Jersey, because there are other states that have this, but a lot of states that I've purchased in, and I have clients that have purchased in, they don't have attorney review at all. So what do you see, I guess, the process of attorney review, what do you think is important during that process? Obviously, it's crazy in New Jersey. You can kind of back out for any or no reason. Either party can unilaterally cancel, even though you have a contract signed and all the terms agreed to. So it's kind of unique to our state. But as an attorney, what do you feel is important to get that through to protect your client's interest?
Yeah, I mean, first, as a buyer, it's important. Not all buyers know this going in when they get to me, that another offer can come in during attorney review. And so that's why it's important as a buyer to try to move as quickly as possible. Of course, every buyer has a comfort level that, the buyer needs to be comfortable with the terms of the contract, changes that are being made in order to go forward. So certainly, that is important. But, again, that's on the buy side. On the sales side, I may say, well, listen, you're kind of in the driver's seat. If another offer comes in, right, then you have a decision to make. But, from the perspective of being a buyer's attorney, I think it really is important, again, to get on it quickly, educate the client, and make sure that they're comfortable moving forward. There are situations where you're not going to get everything that you want in the contract. There are going to be issues that come up, but there's always sort of I try to operate under what's customary and ordinary based on the circumstances, explain that to the client, and then try to make sure that they're comfortable, they understand the contract, and move it forward from there.
I feel like you've had a great balance with our team as far as certainly protecting the client's interest, which is number one. That's your job, but also not arguing or trying to create, I don't want to say drama, but more issues than are necessary on bullet points that perhaps don't really matter. And
Right.
you have the ability
Right.
to explain to the client, take an overall look at this agreement. That little fine point, it's not worth jeopardizing the transaction, because it might take me a day or 2 or 3 to get an answer on that or change it, even if they're willing to. But what difference does that make?
Right.
You've been great with
Right.
that.
And it's true. I mean, sometimes you have to just think big picture from a buyer's perspective. I recently had a transaction where going into it, they knew the seller was going to be very tough on inspections. The inspection language is limited. So again, that's, by the time it gets to me, that's not necessarily something I can change, but the client needs to understand it, be comfortable with it in order to move forward.
From an agent perspective, it's helpful and important, I think, to back up what we've already told the client coming into the offer being accepted, or prior to even writing the offer. Hey, and knowing the market, it's a market where it's a strong seller's market. So we get our offer accepted, it doesn't end there. We need to be quick and aggressive, having the time to do the research and due diligence and review the proposal, and make sure the attorney is looking out for your best interest. But that means the attorney has to be responsive. So you back that up and say, we do need to move quickly. We're obviously going to protect your best interest, and going to give you time to review and respond. But I'm going to do my job. I'm going to be quick. But on your end, we need a quick response as well. And it's nice that there's a backup there, because we've already
It's a common goal.
Yeah.
The
Right.
goal, if someone goes into contract to purchase a home, generally speaking, they want to buy the home. And the seller, I've said this before, but the seller wants to sell the home.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of fighting or arguing or trying to get these minute points fixed or edited, to generally agree on the concepts and the terms that are really important is what really matters, in the end. Then they get the house.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
happy.
And I mean, people need to understand too, from a seller's side, if there's a delay on the buyer side, the seller starts to question, well, what's going on? Are they even interested? Do they want the property anymore? So there's a lot of that goes on that people maybe
Sure.
don't realize or recognize. That's important too.
Well, yeah, and I think when the offer, and it comes down to other states not having the same process, and not having the understanding that once the offer is accepted, that's it. It's me and the seller. Not understanding that they feel like they do have now time to breathe, which unfortunately it's just not the case every time.
But it's important that Anthony explains those
Right.
things, right? Because a lot of attorneys, they either don't explain it at all, they explain it in a way that the client seems to not understand, or they explain it almost too late. And I can say for sure on our team, we explain the contract and any provisions, anything to do with the contract, the terms.
Sure.
The
Sure.
clients understand those terms. But I can also say, and I don't want to say it wrong, but when we're dealing with another agency on the other side, there's oftentimes we've agreed to all these terms. Both clients have signed, right? And we get an attorney review, and the other attorney has sent you a letter or contacts us, or the agent's questioning something. It's like, we've talked about this. This
Right.
is in writing. You agreed to it. Your client signed it. And now the attorney is doing the right thing and perhaps explaining that. And they have no recollection of what they've agreed to.
And listen, it happens more than you see, because I see that a lot.
I bet.
Wow.
And then again, there's always a baseline, what's customary. When the deal gets to me, I'm not changing purchase price. right? I'm not changing mortgage amount. Those business terms, they don't get changed. Maybe you tweak up, the time frame of things. Maybe, the closing date, it's a little aggressive, so we could push it out a week, things like that. But then also you have your additional contractual provisions, which you're alluding to. So for your listeners, there's always a section at the end of the contract which may talk about additional contract terms. Are you limiting inspections, things of that nature, right? And so that's where sometimes you see an attorney, change, tweak, and I'll always get on the phone with the realtor. Hey, what if it's unclear? What does this mean? Tell me what the expectation of our clients is as it relates to this term. This is how I see it.
Yep.
Right. And then again, you're not supposed to change that. So let's stick with what's customary. And sometimes maybe, the party who's pushing away from that agreed upon term, maybe there's a reason. But again, you try to, iron it out as best as possible, stick to what the parties agreed to.
And if not, they've changed you change the terms of the contract, then
Right.
it wasn't agreed to. That's the first problem. The second problem is that, again, that emotional wave of they didn't do what they said they would do.
Mm-hmm.
So despite the numeric values that it might have changed, and maybe they're significant, and sometimes they're not, it's the fact that someone changed, almost gave their word,
Mm-hmm.
they signed, and now they're changing these things that can ripple.
Yep.
Not a good way to start.
No,
Exactly.
Yeah.
That just happened to me, and I expressed the exact same sentiment. It's like you agreed to these terms in order to get the offer accepted because there was multiple offers, and that was the only reason you got accepted. And then your attorney intervenes. In that instance, it was another attorney that we never done business before, and and kind of changes the outcome of the attorney review process because he intervened on something that was already agreed upon.
Right.
With regards to the market's obviously shifting. We're seeing less multiple bids. We're seeing days in the market rise a bit, and that the spring market. Some of our markets are considered spring already because the condo market kind of picks up now, and we'll wait for the residential homes till warms up a little bit, usually April, sometimes March. But we're seeing a bit of a push here, but it's still changed a little bit from what it was a year ago.
Sure, absolutely.
During attorney review or even after attorney review during the process, we've spoke recently with some big bank issues and then kind of having to shift gears to using a more local lender, someone that might understand not only the area, but the file itself better and be able to creatively put that back together. Are you seeing that shift with the market? And then a second part of that question would be, are you seeing appraisal issues that are starting to arise from your standpoint? You see a lot of files, because you do a lot of real estate law.
Yeah, I mean, listen, on the appraisal side, I'm not seeing as much as maybe in 2021. The appraisal is always going to come up as a concern for a buyer. And so there's a few different ways you can tackle that in the contract. And I always say, listen, when it comes to the buyer's rider, and again, getting back to attorney review, I say it's backwards because you sign a contract, then you make changes to it.
But it's the way we're so numb to it.
Right.
And just real quick, reverting back just a bit, an appraisal is the value that the bank deems a property is worth because the bank, in their eyes, are taking a significant risk to give you the loan
Correct.
to finance the property.
Correct.
So the bank has to say that the home is worth what you're paying in contract. Otherwise, it starts to shift ratios and may or may not affect the file.
They're not going to loan you what you're applying for in terms of the loan if it's not worth what you're purchasing it for.
Yeah.
Even more simplistically, no one wants to overpay for anything.
Right.
And so oftentimes when a buyer comes to me, that's what they're thinking. They don't want to overpay. And so that's why the appraisal and having language in the contract to protect them if the property doesn't appraise for the purchase price is significant to them. But there are other ways to what you were alluding to sort of cancel the contract, even if you don't have an appraisal contingency. An appraisal contingency is actually a provision that says you can cancel if the property doesn't appraise for the purchase price. So if it appraises below, you can get out. Some sellers don't like that. And so it can become a point of contention in attorney review. But my perspective is don't push on that because there's other language that you can propose, or just mechanically, if you don't get that loan amount that you're applying for that's in the contract, then you can cancel for that reason.
The buyer's double protected.
Exactly.
Super simply.
Exactly.
Because if the appraisal throws the ratios off and they have to put more down than they originally anticipated in the contract, those weren't the terms they agreed to.
Precisely.
So if the lender's saying, okay, we know you said 20%, you're gonna have to put 23% down or whatever the ratio.
Right.
They could say no, and then they're gonna get issued a denial letter based on the 20% no longer works.
Exactly.
So it's this double protection.
And what happens then in that situation, normally the parties have spent a lot of time, they're invested at that point.
Yeah.
They will typically negotiate.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't reach an agreement, but at least it fosters that process.
Very few times in this market do they not at least try. I did see back in the last recession, 2008, 9, I'm sure Alfredo saw some of this, but people were so scared at that point that getting an appraisal, and oftentimes quite a bit less, because
Sure.
after they made the offer, it could be a month before that's done. And now new comps have surfaced, and it was just
moving
tumbling.
quickly.
And they're like, oh, my agent misled me, or I don't know what the market is worth. I don't even want to buy anymore. I'm just going to rent. I'm going to wait, or I'm going to wait a few months to buy something because I'm just going to get it for less. But we're not really seeing that now. We're seeing, like to your point, we're not seeing that either. We're not really having many appraisal issues.
Yeah. And here's something that that I always say to give the realtors a plug is listen to your realtor, right? That's part of what they do, right? And so, yes, you may get into a bidding war. And so that final price that you accept, it may not be what it was listed for. But again, the realtor is there, right, to guide you and say, okay, this should appraise, right, for this price. And I think that's important. 9 out of 10 times from what I see, the property does appraise.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that's important. I reiterate that to the client. It's very rare that it happens where property underappraises or that it underappraises for a significant amount. I've seen it, but it is not the norm.
Especially how we operate the way we operate is we're not throwing numbers out of a hat. We show them the data. So this is what the market is right now, and there's a lot of activity on this particular property because it's priced well, and this is what we think. We've discussed it before. We give a 50-50 number, right? We give them 50% chance. If they put this number in, they have a 50% chance to get it. If they go higher, the higher their chances go. And then
we got to kind of tell them, remember, if you have 50% chance to get it, you have a 50% chance you won't get it.
Yeah. Right.
But the higher you go there, what I do is the higher you go there, the better probability you have. But I probably wouldn't go above this, and that's pretty much that threshold of the appraisal, because I don't want them to. And some clients have said, I don't care.
Yep.
Right.
I'm going above that number because I really, really want. Okay, there's still no guarantees, but if you go here, I really think you're going to get the house.
And to go back on the language of the appraisal, as you were mentioning, I mean, I've seen sometimes it comes back and says, as you mentioned, if it doesn't appraise, the seller or the buyer can terminate. I also often intervene and say, let's change that language to that they can have a conversation first,
right,
before the termination. I think that helps sometimes too, so that because as you said, they could be a month down the road. They've done a lot of work. The sellers are probably prepping the move already, and all of a sudden, boom, appraisal issue. So I think that's important to change the language too. And sometimes, as an agent, I try to stay involved and read riders and see where I can, kind of give some advice to from my perspective. But obviously, ultimately, the attorney is going to give the client the best and final advice.
We had an issue, changing gears a little bit. We had an issue recently with, actually, it was your deal, with, I think it's a multifamily. We had a oil tank, which we kind of knew, and they said, oh, we don't think it's there. And of course it's there. I wanted Anthony's opinion on, when you see that, can you walk our listeners through the process of both if you're on the seller side and, of course, if you're on the buyer side? Because in New Jersey, let's face it, for a period of time, that was the heat source, or at least the most common heat source.
Sure.
So there's a lot of homes that have oil tanks. And quite honestly, up until, don't quote me, but maybe 10 or 12 years ago, it was more normal in my experience that these were filled, decontaminated.
Correct.
Yeah, decommissioned. And you get a certification saying that. Some lenders would want that, other lenders didn't care. But either way, the oil tank's still there, and potentially any soil contamination would still be there under, usually because of gravity.
Correct.
And people didn't know this, but that was the normal acceptance. And since then it's changed again, maybe 10, 12 years ago, something like that, where now buyers got more savvy, and or lenders were requiring, some townships were requiring, remove the tank, do the soil test.
Exactly.
And then you may have to remove the soil, and they do another test, and it goes from there. But can you explain from a legal perspective what you're seeing with that and how you deal with that?
Sure. I mean, from a seller side, listen, it's going to be done. The buyer has the right to do a tank sweep and perform that due diligence. So on the sales side, you'd have to let that process unfold. Now, certainly there can be issues or things can be arguable, right? Analyzing certain results, does it qualify for certain kinds of remediation, right? Those issues are going to come up. But on the buyer side, I tell my buyer all the time, right when we conclude attorney review, you're getting your home inspection, you're getting a tank sweep. That has to be done. And to your point, if there's an abandoned tank, it's already been decommissioned, filled, it still needs to come out. That's just the norm now. Like you said, over the past 10, 12 years or so, that's been the change. Whereas in the past, you could just fill it and just leave it in the ground. Now it has to come out. And it's really to the buyer's benefit for twofold. Number one, if they ever sell in the future, they shouldn't. They're going to then have to deal with the issue.
It's only going to get more strict,
right? And then what are you going to find? Could there have been a leak and maybe it was missed, and then you're dealing now with the soil contamination issue.
It's always going to be a concern, and I deal with a lot of savvy investors, people that buy a lot of properties. But even in the heyday a year ago, when people were waiving everything, if they were even buying at all, they would oftentimes have an environmental structural contingency in there. Right. They said, I don't care about anything cosmetic, and I don't need a mortgage. I don't care about the appraisal, but I want to check to make sure environmentally it's sound, which is typically oil or some kind of contamination from an oil or similar source. And structurally, they don't want it to be unsound, so.
That's true. And even, just a side note, this is an interesting thing. What I do is I'll submit a request to the municipality, an OPA request. I want to see what records they have. I know that your team does it as well, which is great. Not many realtors do that. But I've seen and been involved in deals where the company comes, and this is no knock on anyone, but they do the tank sweep. Nothing comes back. Everything's clean. But then I get records from the town indicating that there's a decommissioned tank. And so that can be problematic too. So it's always good to take that extra step, see what's out there in terms of municipal records as well.
100%, because there's also liability there to some degree, for the inspector, and sometimes they'll go after everyone. So you want to make sure that whatever's potentially there is found and dealt with, in fairness to both parties. With regards to representation of clients that are purchasing new construction versus existing construction, and then there's kind of a middle ground where you have new construction on existing foundation, which often don't come with the 10-year warranty. Right. And that needs to be explained.
We did have a question. It was just regarding reputable companies. We do have one, and actually just utilizing one, so we can provide that information.
For what? For the
oil tank company.
Sherlock, out of Franklin Lakes, Sherlock Inspectors does the tank sweep.
Yeah.
So I
think we're talking about removal.
Oh, removal.
We have somebody as well.
Yeah, we've got two companies we use, which we can email.
We can send that. We can send that out.
Okay.
So, getting to new constructions, of course, if you're purchasing a brand new property, comes with a warranty, a new homeowner's warranty, issued through the state. And so as a consumer, that's important to know. But also you're gonna go into that transaction a little differently, right? A new build, a new home, everything should be pristine. Now, typically as a buyer, you won't have your home inspection until further on in the process, obviously, because home needs to be built, but finishes need to be installed and everything. But you have the right in that situation to say, hey, I mean, the walls may be scratched, or the floor is scratched, and that is something that the contractor and or seller will address. That's not the norm in your routine purchase of a single family home or condo. Cosmetic issues in the normal situation are essentially off the table, and that's just another one of those customary things.
We make or at least I make a reference, and I tell my team the same. If you buy a new car, brand new car, it should be waxed up and detailed and ready to go. There shouldn't be any scratches or dents or windshield cracks. It's brand new. But if you buy a used car, they're going to try to make it look as new as possible, but it's used. Someone has used that vehicle and there may be damages. So it's the same as the home, and the warranties with the car being used and new. Sometimes they offer whatever, but they're different either way. Right. So they're also different with the
Well,
home.
there's just zero warranty on a used home.
On the home,
which is a great analogy.
Although you can provide, there are
you could do the
secondary market
yeah.
warranties that we've
Yeah.
recommended depending on situations. But yes, if you don't put something into place,
Right.
And to your point about warranties, another thing that comes up is, again, just because something is old, if it's working properly, really not a basis to cancel the contract or to ask for a replacement or what would be considered an upgrade. Again, that's just what's customary. Right? I didn't make it up, but that's just how the parties operate.
That's the important thing of and this is why we recommend and utilize attorneys such as yourself, because you've gone through the process. You're not, when we have a client that uses an attorney that doesn't specifically practice real estate, and they just they've done a transaction before or whatever the case may be, they don't understand that process. So the inspection report comes back and their cousin wants everything under the sun, and they're going to push for it because they don't know any better that these are not customary requests on a used home, right?
And if you think about it, if a roof is fine, but its life expectancy is 20 years and it's 25 years old, but there's nothing wrong with it.
If it's not leaking, it's hard to ask for.
Exactly.
A funny, just quick story on that. I had a home that I sold. I listed in Bergen County. This is at least 5 years ago, but they bought it in I want to say 1982 or something. And at the time, the hot water heater was old, right? So it was 10 years. They're 8 to 10 years typically. And they're like, we were going to replace it because this thing looked ancient. And I went in there and I said, how old is this hot water heater? Like, I don't know. We purchased the home in whatever it was, 1982, 1984. And it was here then. It was not new. It was definitely old then. And it's still working fine. So we never replaced it. It might be less efficient. So of course that buyer said, hey, I want this replaced. It's 40 years old or whatever it was. And they're like, we're not replacing it. It was fine for us. We asked too.
It's probably the best water heater that ever existed.
Right. Some of the things that were built back then seem to last a lot longer.
They don't make them the same anymore. But in that situation, you can there are warranties out there to cover those components that should something fail, it may then be covered.
And they're pretty reasonable. They're not astronomical.
Yeah, it's a couple $100
bucks. It's a peace of mind.
And you have some, a replacement of a furnace if you're not, as you said, if the inspector says it's working, there's nothing to repair, but it's near or past its useful life, can't really ask for a new one. But getting that extra protection for a couple $100 bucks, maybe within the year it breaks, and there you go. Now you have a replacement.
With regards to relationships between agents and attorneys like yourself, explain that process. And I can't, for me, with agents or even attorneys, they're not all equal. With my experience working with different attorneys, there's a reason why I choose you, right? Because professionally you're top notch, but you're also knowledgeable, and you're a pleasure to work with, not only for myself but my team, and most importantly, perhaps the clients. The clients aren't happy with who we recommended. It's one of the last reflections on us, because we give the attorney the file as it's going to close. Do you see, and I've asked other attorneys this question, but do you see a disparity or a change, or do you treat the files differently, perhaps would be the best way to put it, depending on the capacity of the agent? In other words, are there different levels of professionalism that you see with Anthony's business dealing directly with realtors?
Yes and no. Because just how I am, I'm going to work it, whether you're with me or you're not, as a realtor, right? So if the realtor's not doing their job, I have to work harder, but I'm working hard to make sure it gets done, right? Because at the end of the day, if the realtor is going to take a back seat, someone's got to do it. And I'm kind of view myself in that situation as the quarterback.
Well, there's sometimes taking a back seat, and there's sometimes, I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that perhaps agents can be overbearing because they're overbearing on our side, where you have agents where they give you a deal, it's together and wipe their hands, the attorney's going to handle it. And you have other agents that are kind of in the middle, which is what we try to do. When asked, we try to provide feedback, we try to facilitate, we try to assist, but we're not the attorney, and we're not going to pretend with the attorney. And then the other extreme is they're calling us every 5 minutes, texting us, what's going on? What's going on? Is there a game? Are you playing game? It's like, what are you? Like,
yeah, I've seen that happen with agents, and I tell the realtor on my side, listen, I'm happy to get involved and be the bad guy here, right? If someone just needs to tone it down, I mean, it could be a variety of different things. Sometimes they may think that there's an issue out there when there's not. I had a realtor once, she was submitting Oprah requests, and she was claiming that there was an issue with the sewer pipe connection, but it was all nonsense, right? But then I had to get involved because the realtor couldn't take it anymore.
But it just escalates unnecessary drama,
Right?
Instead of focusing on the task at hand, and better serving your client. So would you say it's fair to say that you work similar or well with all agents despite their ability or willingness to participate? It's indifferent to you.
I think over time I've developed the ability to do that. Again, bringing it back to the focus on the client, right? And if I feel like the agent isn't stepping up, then again, I have to do it on behalf of my client, depending on the situation.
Sure. And that's kind of the agent at that point is secondary. You're in charge. We've given kind of the keys to you, and you're driving the ship at that point. That it is what it is.
Right.
Would you say that your opinion on that shifts if the attorney on the other side has a different outlook or perspective or approach as you? I mean, clearly, and I said this in the beginning, you work well with everyone. But let's face it, there's some people that I would think you prefer to work with, or that you've worked with in the past, like everything's
you can
difficult.
say it. I mean, I've definitely butted heads with attorneys before. Absolutely. But it just depends on the situation. At times you have to be an advocate, right? And you don't want your client to get pushed around. And so, I've seen some crazy things happen. But oftentimes you will see that fight with inspection issues, or maybe it's at a walkthrough and the parties may be making it a bigger deal than it is, or one party's trying to take advantage of another, right? A buyer saying, oh, well, this is a structural issue when it's really not. And then, you really have to push back hard and really dive into the facts and take a look at the reports and say, listen, this is nonsense. What you're saying really, it defies logic. It's not in the facts, right? So those things can come up when you have someone aggressive on the other side. But again, I think if you take a step back, recognize, that you're focused on your client's needs and then what the facts are, and the facts will speak for themselves.
I mean, there's no question you do an excellent job representing your clients. That's why we continue to do a lot of business. But you also have an ability to diffuse situations, which I can't say that about everyone. Some attorneys like to flex their muscles, if you want to put it that way, where they feel like they're getting pushed around, when in reality, I'm reading it saying they're not getting pushed around. They're just asking for something that seems to be absurd. Right. Just nip it in the bud and focus on getting to the finish line, right? And I think you have an excellent ability to do that, where you don't take it personally. And not only that, you don't flex your muscles, because you could. You articulate very well. You speak intelligently. You understand real estate law much better than most that practice.
Thank you.
So you could certainly be in the position to do that, but you don't. You choose to take a different path, which again is in your best interest of your client and trying to secure the home.
And that's what it's about. I mean, it's not about getting into some sort of fight, or for lack of a better way of putting it, a pissing match with another attorney. That doesn't suit the client necessarily. No. It's going to just make things worse. It's not going to come to a resolution, or if it does, then it creates friction throughout whatever time is left in the process. And then who knows what's going to happen from there.
I got a funny story. I remember this when we were saying crazy people. And then I want to see if you have any funny stories. And I don't even know if I told Alfredo ever this, but I had a client that was buying a home in Cresco. This is years ago, but it had to be 6-7 years ago. Really nice home. And we went to do the pool inspection. This is how it all started. And the owner, I guess the agent, I was representing the buyer. The agent that was representing the seller didn't tell the seller. So we walked on his lawn, and he said, you got to get off, I don't want to say it, but get off my property. But he's the buyer. I don't care. Get off my property. So that was that. So we finally did the pool inspection after several more requests. So I just wanted to paint a picture of the animosity that was at this point. So we go to the final walkthrough, and everything's fine. We go to the closing, and we get notification that the sellers removing the chandelier that is
Oh boy.
that is sentimental was the wording. And that was included. The fixtures were included. So my buyer's flipping out. He said, I'll walk away. That's it. I'm done. I don't even want the chandelier, but I've had it with this guy.
Yeah.
So the attorneys did a very good job with de-escalating.
Sure.
This is before I knew. And the funny part of the story is he did close. He sent me a picture, and I'll never forget this picture,
I can already imagine.
of the smashed chandelier.
Wow.
And it was a little video. He's putting it into a box, and he had the guy's address from, I got a closing statement over. He FedExed or UPS
Beautiful.
the smashed. He literally smashed it with a hammer or something. I don't know.
I hope he recorded,
but it was
smashing of
destroyed.
it.
I didn't see the recording of that. I just saw a destroyed chandelier, put in a box, taping it, and he shipped it off.
Wow.
I mean, so he's
Oh,
like,
man.
I told you I didn't want the chandelier. Any funny stories from your side?
I do. I don't know if it's going to top
That's
that
great
one.
one.
That one's pretty crazy.
He was crazy.
So this one I would involve a little bit of some background. So husband and wife that I represented, they were selling their home in Glen Rock, purchasing another home in Glen Rock simultaneously. So, right there, you've got issues. You have to coordinate things properly. They went in under contract on the purchase first, and they were very confident that they were going to have no issue selling their home. And they were right. But they went into the purchase without a sale contingency, which made me a little uneasy because, they could have at least tried to negotiate for one. So basically what that means is that they needed to sell in order to buy, and their purchase contract would say if they don't sell, they're not going to buy. So we didn't have that, but everything was timed beautifully. We worked very hard on this. Okay, we're going to close on a Thursday on the sale, then you're going to do the purchase on a Friday. So that's what it was. Now, the animosity between the parties, my client's sale, happened during the inspection phase. I knew nothing about Hardy planks at the time, forgive me, but I'm sure maybe some of your listeners know what they are. And so they're higher end planks. And so, there was an issue during inspection. The buyer claimed that all the planks needed to be removed and replaced
on the exterior
of the home.
I have some in my house.
Right. And so they were just some cosmetic cracks, essentially. They were being unreasonable. So I'm looking up the Hardy website about warranties and the putty that you can use to fill in these particular cracks, which my client did, by the way. Right. So we get past that, but it created friction. So we get to the closing day on the sale. And I told the attorney, listen, my clients, they need the day to move out. Like that's customary. He was fighting me about it. His clients, apparently the buyers gave them a hard time. No, you need to be out by 1 p.m. I said, well, can your clients sign everything in the morning just to give, my sellers the time to move out? They're going to have movers, everything. Okay, no problem. Buyers show up for their walkthrough after they sign the documents at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon with a home inspector. Now, my client, the husband, goes crazy. What are they doing with the inspector? This is uncalled for, uncustomary. And you don't do that.
No, it is, yeah.
So to make matters worse, they conducted a re-inspection of the property.
I don't think I've ever had that happen in 20 years.
Wow.
That's crazy.
2.5 hours.
No.
Wow.
My client's on the sidelines, just watching.
And just for our listeners, a walkthrough is exactly what it sounds like.
Correct.
You're walking through the home
That's
to make
it.
sure it's in the same condition as when you made the offer, because perhaps the movers moved the couch out, they put a hole in the wall,
Furniture
or it's been vacant for a month sometimes, and there's a little leak or something like that. You just want to make sure it's in the same condition, more or less, than when you made the offer. You're not re-inspecting anything.
Correct. So that was crazy situation number one, the 2.5 hour re-inspection on the closing day. My client couldn't control himself. I'm trying to calm him down. I'm trying to get in touch with the buyer's attorney. He's not picking up. So lo and behold, they come back with a couple issues. There were 2 chandelier lifts. One apparently didn't work anymore. They found an issue with the faucet. They wanted those items addressed, and they weren't going to have the title company release my client's proceeds in order to purchase their new home. And this was a 7-figure wire. So the pressure is starting to build, and my clients don't have a sale contingency on their purchase. So we end up working it out. where we're going to hold an escrow. Okay. But I'm fighting with the attorney because I said, listen, this is very unreasonable for these two issues. You're holding my client's wire hostage. They're purchasing another property tomorrow. This can't happen. So between all that, we end up resolving it. But I still didn't have confirmation that the wire was going out to the title company handling my client's purchase. But apparently the buyer's agent tells the listing agent, you'll get a kick out of this. Oh, everything is closed. The seller's wire was sent. Buyers, could have the keys. So he turns over the keys to the buyers. Now my client, who was going completely ballistic, now goes crazy. He finds where the realtor lives.
Oh God.
He starts driving to the realtor's house. Now I'm on the phone with him and his wife trying to calm him down. No, this isn't the right thing. We're gonna resolve this. Don't worry. And during that whole process, I get confirmation that the wire had been sent. Right. So this was like now 6:00 at night. But the funds wouldn't hit until the next morning, but it was fine. Calmed it down. Next day comes. Get this. So
this is gonna be the kicker.
Yeah. So the wire hits on my client's purchase. All is right with the world. I can now relax, right? We're closed. Their purchase goes through. I get a call from the attorney representing the buyers on my client's sale. Yeah, the police are at the property. Apparently, your client padlocked the front doors and changed the garage code. Could you please get in touch with him and ask him what the garage code is, please? So I'm like so embarrassed. So apparently the husband went back to the property that night.
After he owned it. He didn't own it at this point, correct?
Correct. Right. Because the key here is that really the buyers didn't own it yet. They had the keys. Apparently at some point they had dropped off some boxes also, which my client was just completely livid. So apparently at some point at night, he went back, went into the house, padlocked the front doors from the inside, and then changed the garage code when he left.
I bet that's the only time that's ever happened in Glen Rock. It's not really a town you'd see that happen.
No. And, typically what I say after telling the story is, listen, 99.9% of the time when you get to the closing table, there should be no issues. That's my perspective and how I try to handle things. There really shouldn't be any issues. Yeah. That was just like the craziest transaction I'd ever been involved in.
That is crazy. But I think that also speaks to like something that starts early on from our perspective, because that a lot of time that's about leverage too. Like I tried not to disclose too much about what my client's position is, because then that situation could happen. Like now they know that we're gonna take advantage of them. They have to move, right? So it's a delicate balance, and at some point that needs to be disclosed or out in the open. But like when I'm presenting offers or talking to my clients, I let them know, like, we're going to present an offer, but I have to be careful how I approach things, because I don't want you guys to lose leverage or them to, be in a position where they know this is what you're going through. So that's very interesting, because I think that's exactly what happened. Like they kind of just took advantage of a situation that they knew was occurring.
And it's hard, to your point, in that situation, whenever you're selling to buy, I always say you need to have reasonable people on all sides. You really do. And in that situation, those buyers, they proved from the outset, unfortunately, that they really weren't reasonable.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one of the things we can't control as agents. So what I tell my team is, there's three parties that really are going to help you close a transaction and still represent our client's best interest. The home inspector, who will do a very thorough inspection,
right?
But they won't scare unnecessarily. They'll come up with solutions because they want the house. Let's figure out what do we ask for? What are the credits? The attorney, who will negotiate the strongest terms, but again, not scare them or flex their muscles and cancel the deal. And the lender, who's not going to overpromise. They're going to make sure that you're qualified for the loan and they get you the most aggressive, best terms for what you're looking for. If you put those three pieces in, it's incrementally better chance of closing. If you start removing any of those pieces where we don't know, you might get a great attorney. You might get well, that's
Yeah,
not so good at all. And
Right.
same with any of those vendors.
I think I'm just gonna replay that story, and before they choose the attorney, like, here, listen to this first. Who do you want to use now?
Well, we appreciate you coming on. I think that's what we had for today. Is there
Thank you.
anything else
Appreciate
that
you
wanted
guys.
to
No,
add,
like
or-
just again, thank you for having me, and I love what you guys are doing. Keep it up. I think it's great. You know, it's informative. You're educating people, and shining a light on what you guys do as well, because that's an important part of the process as well. I can't do what I do without the people involved in the transaction as well. I think that's important, from the realtors, the home inspectors, to title, mortgage, and my staff as well. So
I mean, you do a tremendous amount of business. I know your main office right now is in Hudson County, North Bergen. Again, congratulations on
thank you
opening
for the
office
plug. I
in-
appreciate
in-
it. Thank
in-
you.
And Westwood, because you already do a ton of business in Bergen County. I know you live in Bergen County.
Right.
So it's just going to be a nice ad, and we appreciate you. You've done a tremendous job for our team. I would recommend you to any agent, any client. So thank you for coming
And
on.
any best way for people to reach out to you?
I would say probably email. I mean, or website. Our website is biancolawNJ.com. That's biancolawNJ.com.
Anthony Bianco.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you
coming
so
on.
much, Anthony.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
And S. Braconi
Mhm.
and at Team Braconi. If
That's
anyone
right.
needs anything from us, we'll be happy to send out that information on the question with regards to
Yeah,
oil
if
tank removal.
that person
There's
just
two
wants
companies.
to DM us, we'll just get that out there.
Absolutely. We appreciate everyone listening, and thank you, Anthony.
All right.